from Mambu, and in this session we're going to explore the future of banking as fintechs are breaking new ground to accelerate change and drive innovation in the financial services sector. Is this a time of increased competition and the fall of the traditional bank, or an age of better collaboration to give customers the best of both worlds? Kristofer Rogers is the GM ANZ of Mambu, who's here to explore that collaboration. So put your hands together for Kristofer. He's a great guy. I love having him on my show to chat about this. One of the smartest guys in the room. Welcome. Come on up.
Not lost on me how much you do for this sector, Simon, so thank you so much. Firstly, I want to clarify, I do own more than one jacket. It's just my other jacket I brought here went out last night and didn't make it home, so I do apologize for the consistency. I told him he'd regret it. And speaking of merch and apparel, we've got Mambu's famous socks and masks in here, and if you want to speak to any of my fellow Mambuvians on the table behind after this, you can bag yourself some merch. I'm not going to throw them out in L style and, say, you get a car, but have a conversation with us and you'll bag some merch. So I guess Mambu has a fintech story, but I'm not here this morning to tell you that. I will speak a little to Mambu as we go through, and I'm going to be super fast, I promise, because I'm aware how much we're running over. But we did a big raise. We closed at Christmas Eve, actually, last year. That gave us double unicorn status, and we couldn't be more proud. It's thrown us into hypergrowth, which is really exciting, but also nerve-wracking. But we're really proud of our story, and hopefully that will come out with the conversations you have with us later today. But I will touch on what Mambu is and our core differences as we go. But what I want to really unpack here is collaboration. Now, I've seen a few sessions yesterday, and a lot of us are talking about collaboration, and I guess we're being quite repetitive about the points. So I want to try and maybe test the room and have you think a little differently about what collaboration is and if we need it and who needs it the most. So I'm going to try and just put some thought seeds into your mind that hopefully will sort of grow as the day transpires. But where is technology today? Who would have thought a QR code would be so readily consumed by the Australian market when it's existed for a while in different markets, but here it's now everyday vernacular or activity. So that excites me. This is a drone QR code in the skyline of Shanghai. That speaks a lot. Don't try and photograph it, by the way. It's conceptual, I think. It doesn't work. But I'll give you a QR code you can scan later. But that's really cool, and that's where technology is. This is Earth 300. It's not a prototype. This is a huge ship that's going to house the future scientists, engineers, and uber wealthy, no doubt, should climate change ever become a thing. Anyway, it's a science sphere. It's really exciting. So for me, that's where technology is as well today. Technology has come a long way, and we use a lot of examples. I'm not going to use Uber and Airbnb, but this really excited me before because I'm a geek, right? iPod, classic, incredible, 1,000 songs. That's huge. Nowadays, we have 60 million on our wrists, right? That's huge. That's technology. That's really cool where we've come in such a short time in terms of capability, data streaming, connectivity, the like. This is crypto. Not really, but I guess what this slide could actually say is, can one social network message change the global socio-economic market conditions in the same day? It does, and it can. That's pretty cool. This is a bank. And look, dramatic effect, it's an older bank, but it doesn't matter. You put a newer bank branch in it, and we have the same problem. It persists. It's a branch. It's a bank branch. So this is the sort of dichotomy we face in the banking and fintech industries. Where is the technology truly at, and how does it marry up? And is collaboration there, which is what we've been saying a lot today, or yesterday at least. So everything is changing. It's not just market conditions. It's not just a pesky pandemic. It's not just sort of customer expectations. It's much more than that, and the slides I just showed you sort of speaks to how fast things are moving, technologically speaking, right? And as such, banking is changing, and it needs to, and I guess that's one of the key points we should leave this conference really thinking about and unpacking. So we have banks evolving, and believe me, they are. And we'll talk on that a little bit later. But there's the challenger banks coming in and enjoying some great success, some very successful failures as well, as someone put it at the Banking Summit a few months ago. And then new fintechs like us peeps are sort of changing the game a little. We're being a bit more competitive. We benefit from speed to market. There's a lot happening in that space as well. So everything is changing more than it ever did, and that's, for me, truly exciting. So back to the future, where is technology today? What's happening? I guess let's all agree that there's one thing we can say for certain: most things are becoming digital, right? And that's especially because of the pandemic. So we are in a digital economy, from e-commerce through to any UX. And if that's true, then what are we doing about it and how are we shifting? So how are these bastions of the big four going to deal with that digital reality? And do these guys and do these banks have teeth when they're playing against people with fangs? See what I did there? It's kind of a dad joke, so I apologize for that. I could have chosen a better slide that actually spelt fang. Anyway, but look, how do those marry, and where is big tech making a play, and is that going to render a lot of what banks do obsolete? So big questions, and I'm sure you all have a view on it, so do think of questions you might want to fire out. But what about fintech? Forget big tech for a second and think about how we are marrying up with banks or not, or competing against them, or working with them increasingly. If we think about what's happened, banks have been through, they all have, at least the top 8, digital transformation. But what is that? I mean, if they've all undertaken billion-dollar projects, ultimately for me it looks like there's just economies of scale, efficiencies, cost savings. Have they truly moved to digitize, or have we merely transformed some of the back-end systems? So that's the really interesting thing we have to think about. What I'm about to show you may disturb some of the audience. This is a real banking architecture. So stew on that for a second. What's really worrying about this is just home lending. This is not deposits or transactions. This is a very real schematic. And I'm wondering where I can plug in my RESTful API and webhooks or streaming API. Is it doable, and is this the real challenge we face? By the way, I'd argue it isn't, and we'll talk to where I think banks are with their technology in a moment. But look, I mean, that's crazy. That's spaghetti, and that's what we often refer to it as, right? The thing is, whilst they were sort of cooking their spaghetti or trying to untangle it, fintechs were making the special sauce, right? So we've been building an ecosystem. And I think that's a key takeaway for this session. I'm just going to time check myself. Where things have changed suddenly. So fintechs came along, and we've been really super focused on various parts of the ecosystem where we can do well. And that has shaken things up fundamentally, and I think it's a really important point. So ecosystems were born out of the fintechs in this room or out having coffee who can build something that's really fit for purpose and disrupts one particular area. And that's where we're seeing, or I'm hopeful, there's the biggest change. These evolutions in one space tend to be digitally native. They tend to be API first for obvious reasons. They're modern tech, and they focus on that part of the system and that part only. So they can be really, really good at it. And that's the really important thing to consider. We do a bit of work with GCP, and they shared some statistics that they did in developed economies globally, probably using 1 trillion data points, knowing Google, who are the biggest ecosystem company in the world, if you really think about it. But not surprising, right? The average customer goes to a branch less than 10 times. In fact, that was a bit of a high number for me. Similarly, there's around 300 touch points with digital or mobile banking per year. Now, unsurprisingly, I hope, to this room, more than 3,000 touch points with a digital ecosystem. What does that say to us? Are banks becoming obsolete? Are banks getting further away from their customers? And if that's the case, then where is the collaboration? So a bit of food for thought. I'm not going to try and answer that. I would opine on it if I had time. So I guess sort of moving into the sort of final part of this is, has technology actually leveled the playing field? Do we now have a Fed and can go at competing with the banks? I will share an opinion I have there. Whilst fintechs have the technology, and we're really good at it, right? Banks still have the customers. 86% of the lending and transactional market is still controlled by the big four. So I know we all feel there's a big enough piece of the pie to enjoy a very successful business, but think about that. Where are the customers? Even if the customers don't know it. Here's a Dolomite account. See you when you're ready for your super. That's changing a little, so that's a really interesting space to consider. In my opinion, therefore, there's a couple of sides to the coin, right? There's technology, but there's also the customer. And to be a bit provocative here, people think banks haven't got the technology. It couldn't be more wrong. They've got experts in the cloud. They get the cloud. They've got incredibly talented engineers. They have transformed to a place where they can technologically innovate. It's just they can't execute on it. It's my theory, and I'd love to know if you guys agree or violently disagree. Then you won't get the socks. But I mean, I do think they have the capability. I've seen it on the bank floors. I walk through them regularly, thankfully. But they just can't execute. So we are better and more nimble at actually doing business execution. Hopefully that will get you thinking a little. The other things that I feel is, I've mentioned transformation a few times. I'll get to that at the end about where we think at Mambu it should be going. A lot has been said over the last, yesterday and hopefully as we go through, about open banking. But think about what that's really done. I know we're not adopting it very fast, but it's forced the banks to rapidly innovate their technology because open banking is built on an API framework, right? Banking is not. So there's been a lot of development and hyper-development and a lot of applications to actually extend on the regulatory requirements for smaller banks. But it's shone a light on where banks need to rapidly get. Shout out to Rob, by the way, who's done some good work in the open banking space. Should have shared the app up here. You nearly got a clap. Yay! All right. So again, really conscious of time. Is the pace okay, by the way? I'm going to just try and really hustle through these last few slides, so hopefully we can have a conversation. But for me, where is finance going? And this has been a topic, again, over the sessions that I've at least seen. In my opinion, there's three ways in which finance is going. There's emerging fintech and emerging finance, and we play a part in that. We're better at origination, better at different lending models, better at different ethical giving and payments and those kinds of things. But for me, the true future lies in this second one, which is embedded technology. So think of those Google stats, where I interface with my internet banking 300 times, but that's probably just a balance check every day. Can I afford that last round? Yesterday I didn't, unfortunately. But really, if they're in an ecosystem, is that where we play? And therefore, are banks important? They are at the beginning and end of a payment. They are because of reg, but are they really where the customer is moving forward? Yesterday, Bendigo TikTok showed that there's actually a different place in that ecosystem for each, respectively. The last one is alternative finance. So buy now, pay later. Let's think how we can reinvent credit. Let's think of different ways of doing it. And that still has a really important place in my mind in the market and has a way to go yet. So these three things are what we should think about, and where really do we play and collaborate? And perhaps I'd suggest it's that middle one, but please do correct me. Very quickly on core, and why does Mambu sort of subscribe to this gospel, and why is it so important for us? I'll tell you a little bit about that. We are nothing but core. It's not very sexy. It's not the coolest part. I miss payments sometimes. But we're at the core of the ecosystem, and we are the core only. And why is that so important to us? Well, that's because then you can build your own adventure around it, right? You can use best-in-breed ecosystem partners to complete the puzzle. You're not tied to us. We're not a monolithic core anymore. And that's really important. So it's this thing we call composable banking, but it really resonates with us because you can choose your own adventure and make everything awesome, quite literally. Just a sort of little bit about Mambu, because we're really proud of our industrial strength. We're regulated in more than 60 countries. Can you imagine the headache and the hair loss that goes with that? This is a sort of spread of our clients. Tier 1s, Tier 2s, challenger banks, FinTechs. Closer to home, we have Hey, Tyro, ADI, and Nimble. But we're standing up and supporting more than 35 million customers with 250 clients, and they probably in market now have about 6,500 products being stood up by Mambu. So the numbers are awesome and inspires us, as we continue to grow. Very briefly, why does Mambu sort of align with this new way of thinking an ecosystem is because, we don't ask you to write 1 million lines of code. We don't pretend to be anything other than core, which is pretty cool. And of course, we're cloud native. I love the way some people try to pivot towards cloud native. How do you pivot towards native? Doesn't make sense. But we were built in this hyper-scalable ecosystem and SaaS-based pricing, which makes it, we really subscribe to where I believe the market space is going. Very briefly, you can imagine Mambu had a lot of success with speedboats, what we call speedboats, sort of launching little projects to validate. Increasingly, though, the big banks are coming to the cloud and to new technology. Prior to 2015, we were in a monolithic end-to-end sort of situation. The neobanks globally have really shone a light on how you can use cloud and SaaS for hyperscalability and speed to market. The research from a lot of our funders is showing that over the next 5 years, there will be a seismic shift towards the cloud and SaaS-based technologies. Okay, so what I'll do in closing, I promise, is where are banks now? And this is being covered yesterday if you were at the session. So in my mind, banks are still working in the venture funding, incubation periods, and then are moving into acquisition. And the numbers are pretty big and significant. But we have to do more in terms of transforming not just technology, but the cultural transformation into understanding how ecosystems work. Pretty simple, right? So last 2 slides, who owns the customer? Love to hear what you guys think after this. Who actually owns the customer? Is it the banks? Or is it the platforms? Is it the ecosystems? Do we care that much anymore about that? Maybe the customer owns the customer. How radical would that be? Now, a lot of people talk about BaaS, banking as a service, and it's a big trend happening now. I would close in suggesting that it's actually back-end as a service. And I do see comfortably where each plays its part. We'll always need both parties. But the true aspirational growth and innovation and catching up with the customer, right, the digital native customer, lies at the front end, and that's where we play. So, it would be great to sort of bury a time box now and see where it goes in 5 years, because there's going to be a lot of change. Look, I'll close there. I promised you I'd give you a QR code that's worth scanning. If you guys scan that, you'll get my whole contact card for free. And you can save it into your phone. So please do, or connect with us at the back. But hopefully that sort of got you thinking about a few things and was useful to you. So thank you so much, guys.
Right.